Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining another episode of the Semi Related podcast hosted on behalf of Optum. Again, a podcast for those of you that may not have joined in the past. Semi Related is not an accident, more of a play on words. And as you guys have probably learned that have tuned in the past, this is not intended to be an infomercial or sales pitch. It's definitely bringing in some of the best and brightest, unique minds in the freight industry, whether you're in logistics, the shipping space, the transportation world, you name it, we try to cover it. So, without further ado, I want to introduce today's guest, Mark Funk over at SPI Logistics. Mark, how you doing, man?
Hey, all right, Chris. I appreciate you having me on the show. Looking forward to it, man.
Yeah. Well, before we joined on the air, Mark and I were just kind of catching up with Jake, but our marketing department about I just wrapped up my final conference of 2024. It feels like it's been a marathon. I've lost count of how many have attended, Mark, but I know we and I at least crossed paths at one, and that would be the Broker Carrier Summit in Fort Worth just a few weeks ago. So, Mark, I don't know how many you've been to, man, but again, anyone that stands out that you went to this year, or maybe it's Broker Carrier, or love to hear your thoughts, mate, on just because we probably crossed paths, but may
Yeah,
not have had the time to really shake hands and have a good one-on-one like today.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, obviously, the carrier broker one that's big. I mean, it's gaining a lot of traction in the industry, right? That's pretty predominant. Other ones that I've attended it and we may have crossed. That was a TIA. That was another one. Tampa went to that was another one. Carrier
Yeah,
sure has it too. A lot of fraud, a lot of fraud going on out in the industry, right?
big topic.
So yeah, and the freight waves up in Chattanooga. So there was a lot of different things going on, and what SPI what they try to do is kind of break that up and send some of the team members out to all of these different conferences and bring them
Yeah.
back. And so I was kind of doing the world tour here the last year or so. So yeah,
Welcome to my
hopefully,
world, man.
yeah,
And again, we won't stay on conference topic forever, but it's just somewhat relevant because Freight Waves just wrapped up, and there may be a few more that I'm not aware of between now and the end of the year, holidays, et cetera. But I am done, man. For the to Mark's point, like it's there's no better way to connect with people. These events foster such a great communal sense of industry folks, and everyone has maybe a slightly different spin on what they're trying to accomplish from each of these conferences. But I feel like I've hit about 20 this year. And so my body, my mind, my liver,
yeah,
everything's looking for a nice break on the holidays. But for those folks that may be kind of on the fence about whether it's Broker Carrier Summit or TIA, ATA, CSCMP, the list keeps going and
yeah.
manifest, you name it, right? There's so many coming up, but hopefully next year as this market, fingers crossed, takes into a better direction, that's going to free up some more discretionary spending. And I cannot reiterate enough how much of an impact and just my own career progression has been really established by going to these events year after year, meeting people like you, Mark, and it's just again no better way to get the minds all together in a setting. So, well, Mark, I wanted to kind of conference talk. We could weave some of that in there because I think some of these topics we've just recently heard. But I kind of wanted to get to know you a little bit, man, because we didn't have a chance to grab that beer at the show. So, what I tell everybody, that this is the age of LinkedIn and social. I can see that you have a very extensive background from multiple vantage points and just some really impressive companies you've been at. And it looks like your experience in the operations world and any kind of the services on the carrier side. It looks like you've done a lot of procurement. You name it. It sounds like Mark Funk's probably worn that functional hat at one point or another. But before we start there, Mark, let's go way back, man. Everyone's got their story on why this industry, right? And I've got my own unique, which I've told a lot, but I think everybody's kind of like, how do you, as Thanksgiving comes up, right? Well, everybody's, how's work? And, half the time I have to reiterate what logistics is, right? I think COVID helped out
Yeah.
a little.
Yep.
But
Mhm.
what point in life are you like, this is for me?
I don't think anybody ever wakes up and says, "Hey, logistics is for me," right? And the funny thing I found is once you get into logistics, you can't really get out of it. You
That's
always
what they
find your way
say.
back
Yeah.
into it. Yeah, but gosh, I guess my first experience or first endeavor into logistics is probably the late '90s. I'm dating myself a little bit, right?
Old guy too.
Uh,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
right, yeah. So I had a chance to travel a little bit internationally and look at some quality systems and processes for companies overseas. And then part of that is how do you get that product from from China or wherever into the United States. And
Yeah.
I think that's where I started getting my feet wet a little bit in logistics. And then from there it progressed into a shipper side with a company called Sara Lee, right?
I
And
know it well. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. Oh boy, I've ate my share of Sara Lee, but Sara Lee is a much larger company, right? So it was there, did some freight pay and some loss and damage, OS&D type stuff, claims, transportation planning. From there, went to a company called Total Quality Logistics, right?
TQL. Yeah, yeah,
TQL, yeah,
yeah.
been there. I was there for 10 years. I was director of carrier operations, and I eventually left that company and went to a company called R&L Global Logistics. It's the brokerage
Yep.
side of R&L carriers, right?
Arnell. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, green and white
All
trucks
big
up and down the
names,
road.
man. Keep going.
And then from there, I got picked up here by SPI, and that was probably about 2.5 years ago, and haven't looked back since. Yeah, this is my first endeavor into the agent model, and I tell you,
Yeah.
I absolutely love where I'm at today.
Awesome. Well, Mark, having worn all those hats, man, is there any one facet of this broad industry that you find most appealing? Because you've worn, again, it's very diverse. So you've learned a lot of perspective and vantage points and just a lot of just history. And if you were to take this industry and kind of, make it into a circle, it feels like you've sat at about every seat at that table. What are you drawn into, man? What out of all the functional hats you wear, and I know again at SBI that's your current role, but what do you did this lead up to this history of some of the prior hats you've worn at those, again, pretty impressive companies? Did that translate into where you are today? And is there, again, like I said earlier, what facet interests you the most of all these hats that you've worn in the past?
Yeah, it's hard to pinpoint one thing. I was watching a podcast that you had. I think maybe it was Swin you had on it before, and he was talking about he's a data guy, right?
Yeah,
You know,
Swan. Yeah,
so
yeah, yeah. Swan Web.
right,
Yeah,
Swan.
yeah,
I'm sorry, yeah.
yeah.
And
That's okay.
one of the things I'm a big proponent of, like, in God we trust. Everyone else bring data, right?
There you
So
go.
I absolutely love data, love operations. But one of the things that really transcends for me is getting into a problem or an opportunity and finding out how you can fix that. When you talk about logistics, it's abound with opportunities, right?
Yes, sir. Yes,
Yeah.
sir.
So, I like the operations piece and helping people out, and just trying to put all the pieces of the puzzle together. And for me, that seems to work pretty well. And SBI had a need where they were looking to bring somebody in to kind of take this carrier model or procurement role for them and their agent, and move that forward. And it just seemed fit pretty well for me what my interests were. So, yeah.
Do you think, Mark, the agent model, the 1099s, whatever you want to call it, has been
Yeah.
around? The Landstars of the world, typically, and again,
Yep.
there's a lot of history there, but you see that
Sure.
model. What about that? What do you think the upside of that model is versus more of that cradle to grave or traditional? I'm a Chicago guy, so the split model where you're in
Right, split
office.
model. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
So, I mean, again, I think it's highly debatable, and every organization will make that decision. But having kind of now in this agent world, where do you see relative to some of your prior experience, where do you see the upside for folks that, again, this is kind of why I'm asking. We've been in a pretty rough market, right, for the last 2.5
yeah.
so years. And I think there's a lot of chatter, especially in the brokerage world. Like, gosh, I'm really feeling it. My book of business is really hurting. And then there's the big mega brokers out there that kind of take a different approach. But again, having seen it through the lens of SBI now, and that agent, anybody out there that may say, I've got a really good book of business at a really large brokerage, like some you've been at, and they
Sure.
may, is there merit to saying, hey, if you're really good at what you do, you have the book of business, the relationships, why do you want someone else to take a bigger cut of that? And I guess the caveat is, well, there are pros and cons, right, to being in the agent world versus having the W-2, right? So I'd love to
Sure.
hear your thoughts on a compare and contrast of the broker that may be contemplating, hey, you know what, I'm ready to take the leap and just do this myself and kind of run my own show here versus being kind of at the mercy of a much larger corporate environment, and again, relative to brokerage.
Oh yeah, sure. So there's a whole lot to unpack what
Yeah.
you just talked about right there. So at R&L, we ran a split model. So so
Hmm.
we had a sales team with the brokers in house, and we had our carrier procurement team, and we ran it like that. At TQL was a little bit of a mix of of each other and whatnot. But I can tell you from an agent perspective, what I've seen. You're building your own business, right? And you're
Yeah.
doing that. And to answer your question, what do you think about? How do you consider that? In today's world, one of the big things you have to worry about are non-solicitation, non-competes, right?
Yeah.
Now I know there was the ruling or the judgment saying that non-competes are going to throw those out, but I think that's going to get contested. There's going to be a lot of different things. It gets a little dicey. It really does, right?
You bet.
Yeah. So, some of the non-competes and non-solicitations, they last a year, 2 years. And whether you fall on the left side or the right side of that, it's something that you definitely got to contemplate.
Right.
From my perspective, if I was a broker and, that's something that I didn't have to worry about, I would absolutely go with the agent model. Just from what I've seen, being at SPI and talking, I'm also friends with a lot of other people who work at other agents as well,
Sure.
right? So it doesn't have to necessarily be SPI. It could be another agent, but you're creating your own business, really, is what it is.
Yeah.
And if you can align with the right agency, right? So then, hey, your accounts payable, accounts receivables handle all your tech stack, right? And I'm sure we're going to talk about
Right.
tech stack today. All of that's handled for you. If you got all it's really about the back office support is what I found, right?
Hmm.
So when I'm out there and like we were talking how we started the show today, we were talking about different conferences. I'll meet agents, and and I'm just curious, hey, how does it work? And I'll start talking to them. And one of the things that is resounding that comes across is whether or not they have back office support,
Right.
right?
Right.
Yeah, sure. And that's something when you think about when you make that change from a broker and getting a paycheck versus I'm an agent and I'm getting a 1099. I'm working for myself. I'm working for my own business. I think it's a big difference. I really do. And I think you have a lot
Sure.
of a lot more freedoms.
Yeah. I think there's merit in that. And I think, again, that entrepreneurial mindset for those folks that are just, working their butts off out on the floor of some of the bigger ones I've been at, I think there's always that moment. They're like, I wish I was, again, and you can probably tell us more about, I think there's like, again, what from a comp and the
Sure.
commissions, et cetera. I think that's
Right.
typically if you're in a carrier customer sales role. And, I think there's surely that's the incentive, right? I want to put more in my pocket for the work I do. How do you kind of, I'm sure that's a question you get, like, here's kind of where I'm at today. I got some benefits, we'll go with that. But is that really, like, what's that point of time where you go, if you're really good at what you do, don't worry about all that. You mentioned the back off support, which we can get into as well. But just from the sheer safety net or perceived safety net of
Yeah.
working on at an office versus the agent, how do you kind of navigate that conversation? Because whether they overtly express that concern or not, I'm sure they're kind of sitting there like, what's the risk, Mark? I think that's, and maybe it's compensation, maybe it's something else, but I'd love for people to kind of just be able to walk away today and go, okay, at least I learned a lot about more. And as I'm weighing my options into going into the next calendar year, maybe this is something I want to consider more and talk to a guy like you. But how would you answer those kind of questions today
Well,
relative to
first
that?
thing I would say, is I would ask the proverbial question, why not? Right.
Right.
And I want to go a little bit deeper in that, right? So it's not just that sarcastic, why not? It's what's holding you back? What's your limitations? Okay, so you need medical coverage, right? I got it.
Sure.
Oh, okay. Maybe you need, life insurance. Maybe, everybody's journey is different. So
Hmm.
there's what is holding you back? And then once you find out what that is, when you're open and honest with an agency and you say, okay, well, hey, listen, I'm concerned about this. I would need some type of startup capital, things like that. You can negotiate those deals, right? Depending upon your book of business. So you can go to an agency and you can say, all right, here's my book of business. Here's my background. I need some type of safety net,
Right.
right? And that safety net could be, hey, listen, I need whatever it is. I need 10,000, 20,000, 50,000, whatever the money is,
Hmm.
and then based upon your book of business, you can build that into it. And some agencies
Interesting.
now,
Okay.
yeah,
I don't
right.
think a
And
lot of people realize that. I
I
think
don't
they
think they
look at it as
do.
very, very binary. So it's good to hear this.
Yeah,
Keep going. Yeah.
right. And something I've also learned is there's no deal that is absolutely set in stone this way, right? So you work it out, and it's got to work for both parties. So I've
Hmm.
seen certain agencies where what they would do is they'd say, okay, well, hey, listen, you need $50,000 because you got to buy your health care coverage for
Yeah.
2 years in advance, or you got to pay your mortgage and your health
Yeah.
care,
Yeah.
right? I mean, hey, we all need that kind of stuff.
That's right.
So you work that into the deal, and so maybe, and I'm not here to orchestrate a deal for somebody, but I've seen deals, with other agencies and whatnot. I can't really speak so much for SPI. We can do things as well,
Hmm.
but maybe the compensation package is something that gets paid back. Over 24 months, over 12 months, over 18 months, and you work that in. So maybe the first 12 months or 36 months, the company would get the SBI company or the agency would get I don't know 40% of the commission, and then it rents down, because you're
Sure.
paying that off, right? So
Right.
it's almost, yeah. And that's one of the big things that when I start talking to brokers, not agents, when I'm talking to brokers and friends that I still have who are brokers, they worry about that.
Yeah.
They worry about the non-compete and they worry about the safety net, right?
Right.
And there's some things you just can't do because of a non-compete or non-solicitation. But if you've got somebody who can work past that, where that's not something that's in their purview they have to worry about, then you can always orchestrate a deal. I mean,
So what do you say?
there's always a
But
deal to be made. There's
I
always a
agree.
deal to be made.
Everything's negotiable typically, right? Well,
That's right.
let's talk about that, because this is an industry that's notorious for, putting people in cuffs on the non-competes, non-solicit. I do, this is a very highly, debatable topic, right? Depending on where you sit.
Sure.
And I think again, for folks that go, well, hey, Mark, I actually have a, 3, 5, 10 million. I mean, if you really add it up, and again, whatever metric you're determining as your book of business, is that freight under management, is that personal revenue generation? Like, there's a lot of moving parts there. But how do when someone's kind of, that's the reality, is a lot of these bigger brokers that you and I have been a part of, their corporate ideals are very like, hey, we just, we're not here to lose revenue to a rock star sales guy. And I think that, the debate is, well, if your company is really taking care of your people and they're taking care of your employee, or the customers rather, then, you should have nothing to worry about. But at the end of the day, and I've been a shipper too, right? If I like working with Mark, that's really ultimately where I'm going to go anyway. And I just feel like all this contention and friction that's there is just creating the inevitable will eventually happen, whether through the courts or elsewhere. And I think the non-solicitation, I kind of agree. I get that. I kind of think the competes are a joke. I'm just like, look, guy like us, two guys like us that have been around, what are you teaching us that we didn't already know before we joined this organization, right? So
Yep.
I've kind of personally decided I don't sign non-competes anymore. And if that's a deal breaker, so be it. But with the non-solicitations, I get it. But again, my question to you, Mark, on this is, what is that look like when someone says, hey, I do have this? Does SBI say, is it just kind of the end of the conversation for you guys? And I'm sure not just SBI, but anyone in this agent model. Or is there an alternative path to kind of get them onboarded, kind of keep an eye on, don't cross the line on what you contractually agreed to, but we still want to we have a home for you. We feel like we can still plug you in sooner than later. Or is it just like not a fit, or let's check back in a couple of years? How do you address that for people? Again, bringing you a book of business to SBI in this case, but there are those cuffs that you got to worry about. How do
Well,
you guys
sure.
address
Yeah, so I think it's actually all of the above,
that?
really,
Okay.
right? So is it legal? Is it ethical? Is it moral? Right?
Right.
And you lay that out. So we've had individuals approach us with, hey, I've got this non-solicitation, I've got this non-compete, and as long and you have to be forthright about conflict, right?
Yeah.
So what is it? And let's take a look at it. And if it's in a situation where it's documented and it's laid out that, hey, this isn't going to work, then hey, Mr. Mrs. Potential agent, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
You've got this going on. We'll see you in a year, or we'll see you in 2 years, right?
Sure.
Or if it's something where it's going to make sense, right? Is it legal? Is it moral? Is it ethical? Well, then we take a look at that, right? And to your point that you were mentioned earlier, Chris, you get it because you've been around. It's about relationships.
Yeah.
It really is, right? And I was on the shipper side, and we had relationships, and that's how things work, and that's where
Mm-hmm.
we sent our business. I mean, we would never do anything that was unethical or unmoral. We wouldn't pay an exponential amount of money to move freight, but we also wouldn't be asked to move that because of the relationship. That's why
Right.
we have those, right?
I
You
think
know,
that's the
yeah,
big thing, though. Everyone is, and I think a recruiter is also kind of getting the same. The folks I deal with, especially in this industry, there's sometimes this notion from an employer that's like, oh, Mark's got this massive book of business, and that's automatically going to transfer if we put him over here. And I think, you know, in addition, like, they just don't understand that, like, to your point, is it legal? Is it moral? Is it ethical? Like, is that there's a false assumption that that this is going to happen. And I feel like, how are these companies not realizing, like, that's just not reality? And maybe it is in the future, but it's going to take time. And I think at the end of the day, go back, if I want to work with Mark, I'm going to figure out a way to work with Mark, but I may have to
sure.
sit on the sidelines for a bit until the legalities kind of sort themselves out. But I don't know. I just feel like that's a mindset. And some folks I know out there have sold themselves in an interview on, I'll bring that book of business only to get hired. And then then the paperwork comes out and it's a mess. And
Right.
nobody wants to go down that path, right? It never ends well. But
Well,
I just think this is a great topic because that's the debate.
yeah, well, sure. Again, it's part of that onboarding process,
Yeah.
right? If you're going to bring on, I know if we're going to bring on an agent, we're going to sit down and we're going to have those conversations. We're going to be forthright about conflict. Where are
Yeah.
you at? What's going on? What's your book of business? Who's your customers? Because here's another thing with the agent model that you typically don't have with your brokerage models, right? If a new agent comes on, are there any other agents in the network who has one of those customers, right? And
True.
then how does that play out,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Because as you know, with some of the other brokerages, the way it works is you're assigned that customer, or that's your prospect, and
Hmm.
that's yours, and you keep them until you don't make a phone call on them in 60 days, 30 days, or you don't move a shipment. It
Right.
depends on
Right.
the right, and then you've got the other new upcoming brokers who are in at midnight making a call to the customer so they can steal that prospect. I've seen some stuff like that. So it's like, who are you going to reach at midnight? But they
Right.
made the
Right.
call and they'll finish it up. But with an agent model, that's a little bit different. But
Yeah.
you have to your onboarding process has to be solid, right?
Hmm.
And there are some very reputable agencies out there, and what I would tell somebody who's considering making that leap of faith, is be forthright. What's holding you back? Right? Here's your non-compete or your non-solicitation. Here, be open with your customers, and then go from there. And one other thing I want to backtrack a little bit on, for these brokerages, when you said, what do they not get? What I've seen in some instances is where that inside sales manager they don't have a relationship with their customer, with their
Yeah.
broker's customer. So when that broker leaves, well, that customer doesn't, their connection with the company's gone,
Right.
right?
Right.
They don't want to spend the money to go visit the customer, where agents do,
Right.
right?
Right. I think that's a
It's,
great point. That's a great. And
yeah,
I was somebody asked me the other day, and it might have been at I don't know what event it was, but when you talk, and you'll know, you're kind of an expert on this agent model. Is there exclusivity within the agent? So if you're a contractor, a 1099, and say I'm at, we'll use Landstar. I'll pick on them because they're an easy
sure.
target sometimes. Good company though. Can I also work with SPI if I'm just independent? Am I kind of like is it a free agent, or is there exclusivity clauses for those folks that are with one particular agent? It could be any organization that hires that agent. Is
Yeah.
that, or I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So nothing is ever written in stone, right?
Yep.
You never bring out the chisel and say, this is how it is, right? So I do know agent models where you will have some agents, and they will work with different agent companies, right? Different
Hmm.
agent models. And there's some where there is that exclusivity, right? Where it's okay. Hey, I can only be with this agent model, and this is what I'm going to do it only. So it just depends. When you go into a company, hey, listen, I've got this other group of business with this agent, and I've got this group here, and I want to keep these separate. They can do that. Now that gets a
Yeah.
little bit dicey. That gets a little bit dicey for the actual agent when it comes to billing,
Right.
right? And which load is this, and things like that. And
Right.
there's also that transition period sometimes, right? So when an agent leaves one agency and they go to another, well, they'll slowly bleed customers off from one to another because it's a shock,
Right.
right? And again, all that has to be legal, moral, and ethical, right? You
Sure.
never want to do it. You always want to be above board.
Well, I don't want to beat the horse too much, but I think it's just relevant because again, in my social interactions at conferences and elsewhere, there's definitely some really talented freight brokers out there that are like, I'd love to be
100%.
my own boss, choose my own hours,
100%. Yep.
not have to return to office like you're seeing a lot and have the micromanagement and all that. And then of course at the end, right, I'd love to say if I'm really good at what I do, I know that I'll negotiate a cut of that commission to more than sustain and support myself, my family, my bills. So I think that's what I hope people leave with is really the one key takeaway is engage with guys like Mark if you're thinking about it, whether it's SBI or elsewhere. You want to speak to people, and I think I've just learned a lot in this last 10 minutes of my assumptions weren't always correct. And I think, again, like you said, nothing's really set in stone as long as you're doing the right thing by the candidate and by the companies and former companies. Like I think there's a lot to learn. And I think there's probably a lot of fallacies and misconceptions out there. So anybody tuning in, if you're considering it, please reach out to Mark. At the end of the show, we'll give you his contact information. But switching gears, Mark, you mentioned the back office support. Another account will keep in the same vein of the agent, but I think again,
Sure.
there's probably this idea of well, do I have to go in and figure out how to do all the accounting and back office, and what tools am I going to be provided with? Is there a TMS I play in? What is the I got to have access to something just to conduct the transaction. So give us a little more like clarity around like what an SBI brings to the table relative to the agents that you support
Sure.
systematically.
Okay, yeah. So since you asked specifically about SBI, I'll talk about
Sure.
SBI. And obviously we can get into other agent models too. I don't want to make this just a promo for SBI, right? But I'm very proud of the company. So
Yes.
what SBI has is when an agent comes on board with us, we give them a tech stack. That tech stack, it has a TMS. It has, it's Salesforce with Revenova, but we're
Okay.
also linked in. We're linked in
Yep.
with Highway. We're linked in with Carrier Sure. We're linked in with DAT. We have other external partners, CargoNet, you name it. All the different trucker tools, Project 44, and the list goes on, right?
Yes.
So if you on board with SPI, here's your entire tech stack, everything you need. We also have the back office support, accounts receivable, accounts payable, everything. All you truly have to do is talk to your customer and cover your freight. What we do not offer, right, at least right now, is the Chicago model where we have a separate group who covers the freight for the agent. Well,
Right.
we do have agents who've split their offices up, right? So they have a sales force and they have an internal procurement team, right?
Right.
Um, but we also help with the RFPs, RFQs, pretty much you name it. Anything with back office, we'll help them with fraud, risk mitigation, claims. You got it,
You
Chris.
name
I
it.
mean,
Yeah.
that's absolutely what we do. And now, one of the things that we do also is every year we have a get together. We call it Rendezvous, where we bring all of our agents in. Every other year it's in Canada. And then every other year it's in the United States somewhere.
Okay.
It was just at Nashville this year. It's going to be in Canada next year in
And just for everybody,
2025.
SBI is it's Canadian owned. Is that an accurate statement, or
Yes,
Canadian
yeah,
based? Yeah.
yeah. Well, we're Canadian based. The majority of our agents are in the United States, but we have Canadian
Right.
agents as well, right?
Got it. Got it. Okay.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. But we bring everybody in, and part of that is a few day session on just new technology that we're bringing in, new trends we see. We send out a market conditions report every week. So our agents are up to speed on all of the latest information every week, and we have some agents who will take that right away and send it straight to their customers. So think about this for a second. If you're a shipper and you've got two or three different agents or freight brokers, right? And you get information from one every week. Hey, here's my latest market trend. Wow. You're looking at that. It's right in front of you. Then you can take those key points. You can do research if you want. They're
Hmm.
all linked and backed up and supported. And then go speak to your boss or your superiors or whoever in your company. And you can be, a somebody who's in the know from your vendor, from
Sure.
SBI, right? So then we become basically a supply chain consultant. You
Right.
stop and think about it like that. And that's just, those are some things that we can offer that maybe some traditional brokers don't necessarily do.
Yeah. No, I think, and again, I want to kind of in your role now, just for clarity here, Mark, are you kind of overseeing a group of agents at this point and kind of making sure that they're set up for success? You mentioned all the added bonuses and benefits of being able to plug into an SBI and have that tech stack, have the resources available. Is that so? In your role right now, are you overseeing that? Or are you kind of still an IC of sorts as well, a little mixed bag? Or tell us more about what your role encompasses today.
Yeah, so my title is Director of Carrier Procurement. And
Yep.
then what that involves is making sure that we have a group of carriers who are qualified, approved, things like that are available for our agents to use
Got it.
at its highest level. But then what that does is that also drives down to is if we have agents who have some difficulty sourcing specific lanes, specific types of freight, they'll reach out. Hey, Mark, I'm looking for a truck from here to there. Not necessarily a truck, but I got this lane and
Hmm.
and here's what's going on. But also trying to get involved a little bit with the agent operations and see how can we improve their processes so we can put the best possible carrier in front of them. It's obviously up to the agent what carrier they want to use, as long as they're approved in our system. But when it comes down to it, Chris, if I can give you a carrier, because we have our own internal scoring system, right?
Hmm.
If I can give you a carrier that scored A at the same margin versus a carrier that you would find on a load board that would be rated less than an A, right?
For example, yeah.
Yeah. So why would you not use them, right? And then
Sure.
obviously, right, and there's a lot of data that goes into this too, right? So
Of
you're
course.
looking at carrier reload rates, you're looking at core carriers, primary carriers, and then some of that technology stack too that gets in with the carrier procurement. Um, and I find this a lot with agents too. So hey, Mr. and Mrs. Agent, I'm looking at your groupings here of carriers you use. It looks like you use these 5 or 6 carriers all the time on these lanes. Would you like us to set up waterfall tendering for you?
Hmm.
Right. And
Right.
then,
Routing guides.
an
Yeah.
agent's like, right. An agent's like, you can do that? Absolutely. We can do it automatically for you. And
Yeah.
then I'll spend time with them. I'll set up a Zoom call with them. A lot of times I'll travel to their office, set it up, and so the way it works is, if they get the load from an EDI, it comes in and it just starts waterfall tendering out to the carriers that they were going to send it to anyway. So the load's
Right.
built, it gets sent to the carrier, and then boom, it's done. It's all done for them, right?
Pretty automated.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, it's pre-automated, right? And then also, if they don't necessarily have primary carriers, then what I can do is I can reach out to them and say, hey, we have a group of corporate core carriers who service lanes similar to that lane. Would you like me to introduce you to them? Would you like me to
Right.
set this up? So really, in my role, and it's a very long, drawn-out answer. Sorry, Chris, but
No, no. The
it's
more context, the better. That's the point. Yeah. Yeah.
okay. It's more of trying to make sure that we can help the agents in any way, shape, form, fashionable to procure the best possible carrier.
Yeah. Mark, you've been in, let's go on that word procurement.
Okay.
You've been in this space, right? You've seen it from multiple angles. That's another conversation that seems to be taking place. And, I'll go back to some of the years ago when you're, as a consumer, right, in a B2C environment, there's this idea of, hey, if I want to, like, I just booked the flight, right? For example, I get a real time market rate and the data starting to get more granular, right? It used to be, I should say now you get, it's so many data points of, which airline, which lane, which time of day. And now it's at the seat level. Like literally every seat has a
Oh,
market
yeah.
price.
Oh,
But
yeah.
as a user, you're kind of like, you sleep at night going, as a consumer going, well, I guess I paid, I know it's the holidays. I know I'm going to pay a premium. I should have booked 3, like all that's data that tells a story. But in traditional procurement and full truckload, I'm not here to argue it one way or another, but just want to get your take. These annual RFP events that you've probably participated in on multiple sides, it always has seemed like it's just like it's a hedging a bet effectively, right? You're going,
Yeah.
someone's going to win, someone's going to lose. And I think when you lock in, let's say it's traditional 12 months, shippers obviously they've been enjoying this last couple of years a little more than the carrier and broker side. We know that's inevitably going to flip. They know it's going to flip. What are your thoughts on like the future of what procurement should be? And this could be the carrier customer side, but do you think the technology is getting to a point where we can get to more of that analogy of me booking a flight in a real-time market price? Or do you think there's so many other variables and buying power and other things to consider? Like, as someone who's sat in that seat, what do you think what could procurement look like and what should it look like?
Well, that's a big question, right? So nobody has a crystal ball, right?
Yep.
And I want to go on. I'm not a financial planner. This is not financial advice, right? Okay. With that disclaimer out, technology has really helped the industry when it comes to, looking at rates and where we're at, whether, and I'm not putting plugs in for anybody, but, whether it's Sonar, green
Yeah,
screens
yeah.
or DAT or, places like that, right? Or your own internal systems. But it's going to get you close. It really is. And to
Yeah.
your point, a shipper wants to lock in right now for a 12-month rate, right? But 2 years ago, hey, listen, they wanted, and some of them it's 60-day RFPs, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
because it was just so high. Yeah, and in the market as you get it's a cycle to it. It's
It
going to
is.
go up. It's going to go down. There's a lot of different things happening, and then you have a lot of different things that are happening that the data models can't necessarily pull in,
Right.
right? You got geopolitical tensions happening. You've got political tensions happening. You've got weather events that are happening.
You bet.
Right now, you can factor in the old traditional stuff, with produce season and how it starts down, and
Yeah,
so,
seasonality stuff.
the
Yeah.
southern and it goes up,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
That type of stuff. So you can factor in some of the seasonality and whatnot, and the data models do pretty good at that. Yeah, I think some of the big data models actually are getting better in the fact of seeing what other brokerages are paying in certain spaces, and then they take that data and they make it double blind and sell it back to you,
Right.
which right,
All
which some of
data.
them are
Yep.
very some of them are very proud of their product too, by the way. But I think there's always going to be that component of, hey, is this, you know what? Here's a joke, right?
Let's have it.
That
Oh
that's it right
no.
there,
Magic
right?
Eagle. Yeah.
Yeah, am I going to get this covered today?
Yeah.
So sometimes you go back to that. Hey, where am I at? But I do think the data models, in all seriousness, are a lot better than what they used to be, and I think they get you a lot closer. And especially when you're looking at some RFPs, RFQs, um, you can get pretty close. One of
Yeah.
the things that I would strongly say to, whether it's brokerages or agencies or anybody listening to this message, is look at your own internal data,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because everybody has different buy rates, everybody negotiates differently.
That's right.
And the power that you're going to bring to the market from a procurement perspective is different based upon, where you are at in that specific market space. I mean, there's just certain areas in the country where, we have a core group of carriers where we're very strong,
Yeah.
right? And there's some other areas where maybe we're not as strong. And some of these outside models won't necessarily know that, even though, because everybody proclaims AI. And I know we'll get to that here in a second, right? Oh, we've got these AI models and things like that. But it's not refined enough to know that. So
Right.
I think it's better. And what's the future look like? I think it's a combination of external data, internal data, but you're still going to have to put a human perspective on it.
Yeah, and that's a broader topic. And as an optimization vendor where I play the last few years, I am a big believer. I'm very tech forward, very bullish on tech, but I'm also a realist, right? I understand. Say this all the time. I was just on FreightWaves chatting with Grace and Thomas Watson, and we were just saying like AI companies and tech vendors seem to have this notion of everything can be automated, and why are humans do in this industry? Just these guys don't know what they're doing, and how many of these folks, these tech folks, have come into this industry and learned the hard way, right? And it's
Yeah.
not because our industry isn't aware that these problems are there, or we're not aware that there's plenty of room for efficiency gains, but there's a lot more to it than just a surface level, right? So,
Yeah, sure.
Mark, when you think about technology, people, I get this question. I'd love to hear your answer. Like in the next 3 to 5 years at SPI, under the agent model, I think you alluded to it earlier. What does that look like? I mean, do you think that machines in the next 3 to 5 years will be doing a heavy lift of stuff that is considered mundane or repetitive? And my personal plight, you may agree or disagree, is that it goes back to the relationships, right? If calculators are effectively doing all the heavy math, which is a lot of this industry, right? Metrics and miles and money, all
Mhm.
that, right? Is the future just more of like, well, if everything's pretty even in terms of the numerical side, the math, it's a question of like, well, I like Mark. I want to work with Mark, and if everything else is fairly equal, is that become the deciding factor? And is the future just really the talent is the relationships that the rock stars have invested in for long times and done right by their customers and carriers? Are they the ones that just ultimately could win if this technology starts to just equalize the playing field? I mean, and maybe that's not 3 to 5 years. Maybe it's much longer. Maybe it's sooner. I don't know. What are your general thoughts of what that future office of an agent is?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is not all technology is equal. Okay.
Fair. Yes.
Now, with that being said, I am very bullish on technology, Chris. I absolutely am. Okay. I think that those, whether it's a brokerage or whether it's an agency, those companies that invest in the right technology as you go forward will absolutely see improved efficiency from an operational perspective.
Sure.
Those, there's I'll name drop a couple companies: Happy Robot,
Yeah.
FleetWorks,
Yep.
people like that, right? Those technologies, they're game changers. Game
Yeah.
changers, absolutely, right? Levity. I don't know if you've heard of that company, right? And there's a
Yep.
couple other
Yep.
ones out there. So think about that for a second. And this is where I was actually speaking at the broker carrier conference
Hmm.
on. Um, you know, you have this technology out there where people are picking up the phone, carriers, they're calling in and they don't know that they're talking to
Yeah.
a bot,
Right.
right? And it's not, and it's going to be sooner rather than later, because think about a time relatively soon where the carrier uses that technology,
Hmm.
right? So the carrier then says, "Hey, I'm looking for a," they're looking at the load boards. They screen scrape or they pull the information down
Yep.
from API or webhook, right? Whatever it is, and they're looking at it and they're saying, "Oh, okay, I'm going to call these brokerages up on these lanes," and they put it into their telephony system that does
Hmm.
automated outbound calls,
Right.
right? So then the agent or the broker doesn't know that the person that they're talking to is a bot. So then you have a bot and a bot talking, right? And then what about the ethics of that,
That's the questions, right?
right?
That's we got to
So
consider. Yeah.
you got to consider all that. Now, okay, now I know if somebody got through all of this part of this, and they're
We
still
haven't hung up
listening,
yet. Yeah.
right? And they haven't hung up yet. It's the relationship piece, right? So
Yeah.
if you've got the right technology in the right place and you invest in it, because there's a lot of startups
Hmm.
don't make it. Okay. But if
Clearly.
you've got
Yeah.
all that, yeah, right. But if you got all that in place and that's working, then really to level the playing field, then it is that relationship. And it's those little extra pieces that either the broker or the agent, I'm going to use those kind of interchangeably here in this conversation, that they can offer, such as,
Right.
hey, here's a market conditions report, or hey, you know what, here's what's going on in your specific field. I did, I'm an agent and I did a research. Somebody's making widgets in Tallahassee. Hey, did you
Right.
know that here's what's going on with widgets in Tallahassee? You know, visiting people, talking to people,
Yeah.
just just understanding that people connect on the same level.
I
That
think
you
that's
have a
what I
common
get
need.
to. Yeah, I think
Yeah,
that's the face-to-face dynamic. We talked about conferences, and that is the upside, right? Every survey you're going to
yeah,
get is, "What did you like most about this conference?" And inevitably, the vast majority of people are going to go, "I love the networking opportunity to have real conversations with real people about real topics in this industry that we all want to share perspective with," right? But I
yeah.
think there's this other notion, right? Again, of, and you just outlined it, even with seeing the advancements of the AI bots being able to really do the transactional piece without a human in the element in the loop.
Yeah.
I don't, the question becomes, well, if it all starts to become automated, where does the human fit in, right? I think that's the fear we're at right now of people going, what can't AI eventually do that what, and you can apply that not just our industry, but or really, and you're seeing it a lot of industries, and I think that's the when you talk about the existential side of this,
Oh
what is
yeah.
the implication of what is that agent that works at SPI or the coder that I'm working with that's like, AI is starting to code better than me. Like there's a lot of that going on. And I don't know that the industry, we're still early on. And I think there's a lot of emotions, as I mentioned earlier, naturally. But I think everyone's having a really difficult time knowing where's the threshold of what computers and machines and AI start that what they can do and what is a human just going to be naturally and perhaps forever be better than the machine aspect. And I think that's the topic, that's the debate, and I don't know that anyone has the clear answer. It just seems to be a matter of like it's not an if in a lot of ways, it's just a when. And what are
Sure.
we doing to get ahead of it to make sure the talent pool, the human capital, doesn't start to get really overly concerned and start to, I don't know, it could really impact their overall mindset. And I don't know, I wish I had the answer, Mark, but I think maybe you kind of alluded to it. Maybe it is the future as we get together as people more often and have conversations that entail more than what a bot could be able to bring to a boardroom. I don't know. Um,
Yeah.
highly debatable topics here. But any thoughts on that? What is it? What is our future, Mark? We've seen it all. We've seen this evolution.
Who knows where it's going to go? But I'm very bullish on it, and I think that those companies who are investing in the right technology now, it's going to pay them huge dividends when the market turns. And I do again, this isn't financial advice. I do believe this market is
Yeah.
going to turn. I think by May of 2025, everything I'm seeing, reading, I follow Thomas as well,
Yeah.
as well as a few other individuals. I
Sure.
think we're going to be in a different market.
Yeah, I think it's I went to one of Craig's sessions. I can't remember who was on
Yep,
stage, but
yep,
he
Craig. Yeah.
had the hand raise of how many agree with
Huh?
the recession, RIP recession or over. And I think it
Huh?
was the room seemed a little split, right? So there's
Yeah.
again, there is no crystal ball, and there's indicators, and I think this industry has always been an indicator of just broader economic issues around the globe. But I think I think there's still a little bit of, I think cautious optimism was the general
Yeah.
consensus. So
Yeah.
I think we're all hoping to get, we've been riding the bottom so long. It's been a challenge. And I think that cliff that we hit after riding historically high, good times, has just the reality set in. I think we're all ready to hit the reset button and get back to doing business. So hope you're right, man. I also look at it too. The idea. This is another conversation you kind of brought it. You alluded to this as well, Mark. As a tech vendor, right? If I'm working with say your agents, for example, I think there's a big delta between what AI companies sometimes present is where what is it's very different from reality. And I think it goes back to the nature of this industry. You said it, we're dealing with the real world stuff that happens every day in our daily lives as a former operator. Like there's no way you could have predicted these things, right? So I think that's where the reality is machines, although they are eliminating or alleviating a lot of that manual mundane task, there's still like that when you have an exception occur, right? You've got to have somebody that is able to intervene and reconcile those things. You can't be waiting on a data model to try to figure out what to do, because transportation is a continuum, right? We don't stop to figure out the problem. There's no post-mortem, at least not in the moment, right? Someone's yelling at you to fix it. So I think that's something that I always try to make sure I articulate to people that are around this AI discussion. Those power agents that who they are, their knowledge and experience and understanding of nuance in this space we play in is invaluable. And I think that's only going to, these technologies that are coming out are only going to make them more effective, more efficient. And I think that for those folks that may not be thinking into tech, or they're just not meeting the mark anyway, if I'm being fully transparent, when I talk to leadership, it's like, yeah, that's something that those folks maybe want to start reconsidering. So how do we as tech people start to really have the end user embrace this technology versus resist it? And someone who's been on all sides of the coin like you, Mark, I didn't know if you had any. You've probably seen a lot of vendors from whether it was at Sara Lee or TQL or even now at SPI. When you're evaluating vendors, there's one thing to say this technology at full scale can do some cool stuff, but as you and I both are very well aware, that doesn't always come to fruition, at least not in the time we assume. So how do you, Mark, when you're kind of dealing with your agent, your teams, I'm sure this is a topic that's come up. How do you kind of address this with them in terms of like what it means for them today and next month or however down the road, and reassure them that if you're, again, really good at what you're doing, you're fine? So I'm just curious to how does that conversation go when you're having that weekly cadence call with
so
your
it
team?
depends. It's the proverbial with them, right? What's in it for me? Yeah. So when you start talking about, when you're talking to an agent and you're introducing new technology right away, they're going to see that impact, right? Oh, it's going to help me in this way, that way, things like that. So they're all for that, right? When you're talking about trying to increase efficiency on the back end, office end, well, hey, here's what this is going to do. Those calls that you get that take up a lot of your time because they're looking for a specific extension on a posting, well, you can automate that. You don't have to worry about that anymore. You can focus on the things that you need to focus on. But I think what you do is how you gain user adoption is getting them involved from the get-go, right? Because the last thing you want to do is be a corporation where you go in, you say, okay, hey, everybody, we've got this new technology we're using tomorrow. What? Where'd this come from? Right? Yeah. What? But if you get people's buy-in from the very beginning, not just for their buy-in, but also because they're the people on the front lines. And Chris, I know you get this. I don't care if you've done a job for 12 years but if you've been out of that seat for 60 days, something's changed, right? Get that person who is in that job right now so they know, well, hey, we changed. We don't really do it that way. This has been happening, right? So you got to have a cross-functional team. You got to get them in from the get-go, from day one. And then you have better user adoption.
Do you see that, Mark? And I'm going to go to SPI here. When you guys recruit new agents, there's got to be some training period. And I assume that a lot of the folks you bring on are probably, as far as like industry knowledge, like probably a lot of them know the game, right? But when they're thinking about what does my daily workflow look like? I guess you mentioned the rendezvous event, which maybe that's part of it, just kind of getting them up to speed on here's some new investments SPI is making. And again, the entire intent is to make your job more efficient so you can do what you do best. Is that something that you guys, am I right in that assumption that that's where that takes place and getting them involved in the conversation earlier?
From the get-go. So if somebody's interested in becoming an agent at SPI, we'll sit down and we'll do a demo with them. We have a set routine. Here's a demo. Here's our technology. Here's our offering. Here's how we operate. Here's who we are. Right. And then because ultimately, and I think I said this earlier on, it has to be a fit for both parties. Right. And
that's right.
If
that's right,
we have somebody who says, hey, I want to be an agent, and maybe they don't necessarily want to sit through then maybe it's not the right choice for them. Right? It doesn't mean that they're a good or a bad person.
Yeah.
Just isn't the right fit for us. Yeah, right.
That's
So
life.
so
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
we do an initial demo, we go through everything, and then when they on board, obviously we've got our own internal SPI university and everything's recorded, and you can go in and do these learning labs and things like that.
Okay.
But we also take it a step further, right? Because a lot of times people don't, okay, I'm not going to watch the recording. I don't understand it. That's fine. Hey,
Right.
we'll set up a call. We'll go through it. We will do whatever it takes to make sure that they are successful with the technology that we have. Now, we also have people who we bring on, other agents
Right.
who we bring on, and they'll say, I really wish SPI had X, Y, and Z. Okay, so then what we do is we take a look at our tech stack and we see if we have anything that meets that requirement. And maybe they don't know about it. And if that's the case, then we'll make sure
Hmm.
that we highlight that for them. But if it's something new that we don't have and it's a hole, well, then we're going to go out and we're going to go procure that technology, right? Yeah.
Sure. Sure. No, I'll go back to like your days at Sara Lee, right? I think the interesting dynamic I see a lot is you move up in your career, right? And again, been at some big shippers like yourself. An executive mindset, it says, and I say this a lot to like Chris, at the end of the day, I got to report to the streets next quarter
Yeah.
on my earnings call. I got shareholders. Anything you can do to
Sure.
lower my operational costs, the OpEx, the expense, right? I'm all in. My experience says that's where you do a pilot or a study, some kind of analysis, and show them, hey, this is what you could be doing, and they get the eyes lit up with all these numbers, and they're really impressed. However, that's their
Sure.
perspective from the ivory tower. What I see though is you get down to the users that have to really adopt this technology and for it to be successful. And there's often again this big delta of what executives look at in big numbers, macro level, and what an end user says, well, this isn't, I don't like this, or it doesn't do this, doesn't do that. I think there's a gap that we really as an industry need to make sure leadership is sitting with that next generation of talent because they were born with iPhones. Like, right. I remember,
Yep.
I don't know, I'm not going to date myself too much, but
No.
that we didn't have that luxury. It was just a whole different world then. And I think that it's because of the age and generational gap, there's still there's a fundamental difference on what the younger generations, in their adoption of
Sure.
cool technology. That's all they know. And I think that the old
They
guys
got
like
two
us are still in
phones.
this
Remember
kind of
those
position of
days?
like, do I
Yeah.
trust it?
Yeah.
Yeah, just pick up the phone, right? And I think there's still
Yeah.
merit to the cold
Yeah.
call, maybe, right? We're still humans. But it's just all this is just like again coming back off the conference season. All these are great conversations we keep having, and I think that I think this will only continue into next year. And again, I think all sides of the coin, right? You got your tech side, you got the brokers and third party intermediaries and the shippers, but we seem to historically and traditionally as an industry, it's almost like we could be so much more efficient as an industry, but yet there's this mentality of like, hey, I'm going to win some, you're going to win some time. And
Yeah.
almost like we love the game. We like the chase. We like the, I got you. I'm getting you, the shipper's revenge mentality, right? And I don't know. I love to see, where do you feel the biggest opportunities as an ecosystem for us to kind of work better together? And I think that was the point of at least Broker Carrier Summit is to go, hey, by design, we're not letting shippers come to
Sure.
this, not because they're not
Sure.
important. We know they pay freight bills, but we still need to figure out this friction between brokers and asset carriers and whatnot and owner ops, et cetera. We can't even play nicely. So how do we, Mark, if you've got the authority or some influence to kind of, make some, throw out some insights on things you feel over your career we can do
Well,
better. What does that look like?
so I'm going to go back to the same point too, right? You got these people, your words, and I agree with them. The Ivy Tower people. Oh, I'm looking at this ROI, and it should be this, right? Well, okay,
Right.
who contributed to that ROI, and who actually put that down into a use case, right? When I look back over my career,
Right.
a lot of times I'd see people in these boardrooms, and they would say, okay, hey, our savings is going to be this. Well, when you start talking about savings, you start, well, okay, wait a minute. Is that in a bank account somewhere? Versus I'm looking for this line on this balance sheet
Right.
that's going to where it's reduction. And a lot of times there was never any real use case at a lower level. Um, so some things that
Yeah.
can be done, right? Hey, let me demo the software for 30, 60, 90 days. Let me
Yeah.
see if it, now obviously
Yeah.
when you're talking about a larger ERP system, something like that, you can't necessarily do that. Um, but you do have to get the
Yeah.
people involved. And the worst thing you want to hear is, well, our software doesn't do that, but here's a workaround, right? Because then, right, when you
Right.
start dealing with all these workarounds, then it soaks up a lot of time, right? And then a lot of times I'll hear people, well, it
Yeah.
handles 80% of the problem. Well, yeah, but I don't want to spend 80% of my time on 20% of it, right? It's converse. So
Right.
I think that's a big
Right.
thing too. Understanding the
Right.
technology, vendors being forthright about, same thing. Vendors being forthright about conflict. Hey, listen, I've met with some great vendors who've come right out and said, hey, our solution probably isn't the right solution for you right now, right? Uh, that's great. So, and I've got calls scheduled for the next 6, 8 months out for other vendors because they're working on things where they think that's going to be the right technology back then.
Sure.
So, getting people involved early, having a forthright conflict conversation with your vendors, I think is key. Um, and then having realistic expectations on what that ROI is. I
Yeah.
think that's big. But when you talk about the broker carrier summit and not having the shippers there, I think that's key simply because, there's that old school mentality of us, them, whether us is the carrier or us is the broker and
Right.
them, being the other. But when you get in a room and you shake hands with somebody and you sit across from them at a table or you're drinking a beer with them or whatever, and you see, you know what? They're just like you, right? They have a family, they have
Right.
loved ones, they have
Right.
bills, they want to do a good job. They have everything that you have, right? And at the
Right.
most basic level, you guys are doing business together because you have a common need. And one of the things I always say, Chris, if
Yeah.
you get 100 people in a room and you say, hey, what is a good carrier relationship? If you get 100 brokers in a room and say that, right? You're going to have 100 different definitions, right? So I like to sum it up like this and
Yeah.
say, I think that the definition for having a good carrier relationship is having a basic understanding of each other's business needs beyond the current financial transaction.
Well said. Well said. Do you, I is that, would you say that probably is that the biggest takeaway you think you got from BCS in Fort Worth this past, few weeks ago? Is that for those folks, and again, a plug
Yeah,
for
that's Pat and
Dan
Trey.
and for
Yeah.
Trey and all the folks that put it together. Yeah, and I think they're really pushing into the Indianapolis one next year. And again, we'll kind of give them a plug because I think this is, every conference has a little, what is really what's the attendee list? What am I trying to get out of it? For folks that are debating this, and I'm hoping we get more and more people to come out on all sides of the coin, really, asset based and brokers, agents, you name it. What can we look forward to next year if you've got a say in that in that planning session for BCS 2025? What would your feedback be to folks that are kind of debating to go on going, and maybe for if Dan and Trey were listening to this, anything that you would say, hey, you guys did really great on this, anything you'd want to see maybe next year that
Yeah,
wasn't
yeah.
offered in the previous
Yeah,
years,
so I know
knowing they
Dan
just
and
got.
Trey, obviously, right? And it's funny.
Yeah.
Me and Dan used to actually work at TQL together, and we had a
Yeah,
chance to,
small.
to kind of
Yeah,
connect a
yeah.
little bit at this last broker carrier conference and exchange some war stories. But one of the things I think that, and they're doing a very good job of it, is continuing to get the word out and trying to bring more carriers. They're from a broker perspective. Or agent, right? I'm very selfish and I want to sit in a
Yep.
room with 5,000 carriers, right? I, yeah, because then,
Naturally.
I can
Yeah.
say, hey, here's all of our needs, right? And then you kind of set that up. I don't know if you
Right.
got a chance to go through, they called it speed dating, but you sat down. Yeah, you sat
I
down and
did.
you
I
said,
was there.
okay, hey,
Yeah.
I'm looking for
Yeah.
flatbed freight, flatbed carriers going from A to B. And then boom, and you go through that process. But so I think some of the things that I would probably tell them or ask them to do is to do more of those interacting um, seminars, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
I know they had a section on freight fraud and things like that. So when you think about freight fraud, what
Yep.
a lot of people don't understand about carriers is they're actually the true victim. Yeah, brokers are too, but these carriers, a lot of times they don't know that they're being duped into being a victim carrier, and they're not getting paid. In a
Yeah.
lot of cases, they're moving stolen freight. And they don't know it, right? They don't even know. And there's
They
so
don't
many
even know.
different
Yeah.
fraud schemes and scams and things that are happening. You got the double brokers, you got the double brokers with warehouse transfers, you've got the blind shipments. It's
Hot topic.
insane.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Scott Cornell, I'll name drop him. Travelers. He does a great presentation on some of this type of stuff. So if anybody's listening to this, I would try to find out what conference he's going to and go to that conference, because that guy, he really gets down into it. And after you sit through one of his conferences or one of his seminars, yeah, you walk
The
out and you're
session.
like, man,
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll
Yeah.
never think of freight the same way again.
Right, right. What do you, and on that note, I know, insurance is obviously a big part of this. Is there any, like, again, I'm going to go back, Mark, what do you think is the number one thing we can do? Again, I know there's companies like Carrier and Highway and others that are tackling this, but is there one thing that we as an industry could all what can we do as an industry to make sure these bad apples, try to keep them out? Is that just going to be a cat and mouse game, as you see in the world with cyber and breaches and all that? Or is there something we can be more proactive in doing, knowing that, again, a lot of this is, if I'm an agent and I see a big spread on a margin, but I know that carrier may not be quite up to par,
Sure.
I'm in a dilemma, right? Because I see my personal check, but I'm also rolling the dice and then seeing if it, hoping it works. How do you kind of, when you're training agents like that in that exact scenario, right? How do you kind of articulate to them, like, I know that on the surface you want that better rip, but be very cautious, because that could end up becoming a claim and just a headache for everybody.
Yeah. Well, so
What do you
at
tell them?
SPI, we take care of that because we have our own compliance team, right? So a carrier is either approved or not
Yeah.
approved in the system, and they're all scored. So,
Yeah.
and like any other brokerage or agency, we had some work that had to do because we got hit with it. We didn't know that all this was going to happen the way it happens today. Years ago,
Yeah.
you had straight theft, you had pilferage, and those were the big things, but not now, right? Yeah, yeah.
It's all
It's the
cyber now.
strategic
Yeah.
cargo theft.
Yeah.
It's a totally different ballgame, right? And you have organized. It's actual organized
Yeah.
crime rings located throughout the globe, right? Highly sophisticated, right?
Highly sophisticated. Yeah.
So at SPI, it's a whole different story because, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Agent, here's the carriers you can use and here's the ones you can't. But what could we do? Yes, it's always going to be a cat and mouse. You're always going to have crime. But I think there's three parties involved in this, and it's the carrier, it's the broker, and it's the shipper. And TIA had a white paper. I was actually had a chance to participate in contribution to this white paper for shippers, right? I'll get to the shippers last, but when you think about a carrier, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Carrier, is that rate too good to be true? Is somebody going to pay you $5,000 to move a load that normally
Yeah.
takes 2,000? Right? Yeah,
The old
exactly.
paper rate.
So if it's
Yeah.
too good to
Yeah.
be true, it probably, yeah. And
Probably
then,
is.
I'll also
Yeah.
drop for Carrier Assure. Carrier Assure has a broker score now, right? So carriers can go check out brokers,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Yeah. I was talking to Cassandra about that. I said,
it is.
it's a two-way street here,
I
right? I
talk to
think we always
Cassandra
make
all the
an
time. Yeah.
assumption. Like, no.
But
Yeah.
I really like that. They've got that in place now, and carriers, hey, because they didn't really have that before. So she's introducing something to the market that I don't think it's getting enough traction. And when I talk to carriers, because I'll have carriers,
Yeah.
I'll tell you, Chris, I have carriers who call me who haven't even hauled an SPI load. They found my card or my name from somewhere, and I love that. And I'll spend time with them, and then I'll talk to them about some of
Mm-hmm.
these things, right? So I think the carriers can be more
Yeah.
responsible in vetting the broker a little bit more. You got these brokers
I
/
agree.
agencies who, what, you need to make sure that you're vetting your carrier and your customer, because there's a lot of fake customer setups that are
Yes.
happening, right?
Yeah.
And, if a customer's going to pay you $10,000 for a load that normally would pay $5,000, it probably isn't true, right?
Right. And unfortunately, it's just the world we live in, and people get caught up in making that emotional decision at that point in time and don't think about
Sure,
the
sure,
repercussions of,
absolutely.
rolling the dice.
And
So
then the last component, which I think is probably the most important component, is the shipper, right? Because, hey, here's
yeah.
the deal. Listen, a shipper's primary core competency probably isn't logistics, and that's why they're using a broker, right? Hey, I'm going to hire this broker or this agent, whatever, to
You
do
bet.
this for me. Great. But you know what? you also need to take some ownership in this. So, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Broker,
Mm-hmm.
agent, what should I be asking? I don't know. How do I make sure my freight's not stolen?
Right.
I'm glad you asked. Here's a flyer. Here's a
Right.
white paper. Hey, we'll come out and we'll take a look at your dock for you. Right? Are your brokers doing that? If not, they probably should. And I'll tell you,
Yeah.
Chris, when I'm at some of these conferences and I'm talking to shippers, and I'm saying, are you recording the MC number on a truck that comes in? Are you making sure that that MC number matches the MC number that you broker? No. Do you have any cameras? Are you taking, and you can always fake, you can put a different MC number on the side of the truck, and you can also give fake IDs, but it's just those little things to make it a little bit more difficult, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. I mean, again, you and I have sat in the shipper world, and I think that there is an accountability that it needs to be addressed. But it goes back to, like you said. I mean, when as a shipper, right, like Sara Lee, right, we know what we do well. Obviously, we're a massive brand, but when it comes to anything outside of that bullseye of our core competency areas, then we don't know. But it's almost like, well, that's why we're using you. Broker, asset, agent. And I think there needs to be more knowledge base on the inside of the shipper when it comes to their own traffic and transportation departments, et cetera, to be aware of this. And I think in all fairness, I see a
Mm-hmm.
lot of shippers coming to these more and more conferences, and those are the sessions they're attending. How can we help in this fraud issue that just become just out of control? So I'm I'm optimistic that they're leaning in more than they ever have
Oh
before, but
yeah, oh
still a
absolutely.
ways to
And
go.
and I am
Still a little
seeing
ways
more
to go.
shippers, but I think it's maybe because they've been burnt a few times, right? And it's like, oh, we
Yeah.
should have known, right?
Right.
But if you could be a proactive
Yeah.
broker or agent and have those conversations ahead of time, I think that helps.
Yeah. Well, Mark, I've had you for about an hour, man. When you think about we're here, Thanksgiving week, holiday season, everybody's kind of starting to, in one way or another. I know I won't be on airplanes quite as much moving into next month, and that's a good thing. When you look into next year, I know we talked about kind of. I think you mentioned kind of the Q2, Q3 time frame for when we hope that the market really starts to see an incredible rebound. What else excites you about going into next year in 25? And that can be from SBI, it could be just industry wide. Just any thoughts that you may have of things to
Yeah, sure.
consider going
So
into
a few,
2025.
and we already spoke about it. I earnestly believe come May,
Yeah.
we're in a whole different freight market. I believe that, and I'm looking forward to that. I think another piece that I think I'm excited about in 2025 is going to be the impact of some of this, if you want to call it AI technology and how it plays out. I think
Mhm.
those agencies, those brokerages who adopt this, I think that's going to be a big component of it. And I think also one final piece that I'm excited to see how it plays out is you've had a lot of capacity leave the market, right? You had, and how does that going
Yeah.
to play out? As demand picks up, I think we're going to see a spike in rates, definitely spot rates, things like that, and you know shippers are always a little bit late to the game to recognize that. But you know, I don't think
Yeah.
we're going to see anything on the magnitude or the proportions of what we had during COVID. But I do think that capacity is going to get a lot tighter, especially in the second half of the year next year.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing. And this is the driver shortage is another highly contested and debatable topic of, is it truly a shortage? Is it a quality driver shortage versus just a general statement? I think a lot of companies, and you and I have been around long
Yeah.
enough to go through the cycles, right? And typically you
Hmm.
see a bleed out session, right? Because it's again, we're talking about, it's not easy to run anything in this industry is complex. But when you're talking about the amount of CapEx of the asset world, and just it's a lot of cost to it, and the margins are thin. That's no secret. So I think the difference around this time is, I think folks have either saved money or, saved for the rainy day fund. It just lasted longer because people that have been around
Yep.
said this roller coaster ride will not always be up and to the right. So I think that may be a contributing factor. And there's a lot of other pundits out there that'll say, well, here's some other things to consider, but who really knows? But again, Mark, I'm with you. I love your optimism of, moving to next year, thinking about how we tie the technology together. I appreciate all the knowledge bombs you dropped around the agent model, because I think honestly for me, I've learned more personally talking about that, because I honestly don't know how to answer. I've never been an agent, but I have been on the other side of the brokerage game. And I think that hopefully people have walked away with going, hey, if maybe new year, new me, I'm ready to take that leap into agent. And I would, again, I think a guy like Mark and SBI would be a great
Yeah,
starting
sure,
point to at
absolutely.
least learn, right? So, Mark, how can people what's the best way for
Right.
people to
Yeah.
reach
So
out to Mark
obviously they can
Funk?
find me on LinkedIn. They can also reach out to me with,
Okay.
my email, which is mfunk@spi3pl.com. And that's a great way to find
Okay.
me. And they can also, reach us at our website. So I'm always available, really. If somebody needs something, any help, any input, anything like that, even if it's not related to, a load or anything with SPI, just reach out. Listen, we're in this game together. So
Yeah. That's right. I love your takes a village mindset. I'm the same way. And again, hopefully the conferences we'll see next year will continue to reinforce, these discussions that we're having, and just get more and more folks involved that maybe historically hadn't been.
yeah,
Everybody's got a voice, right? So I think that's imperative. So, well, Mark, thanks again for taking a little time today
yeah,
on a holiday week, no less. I'm sure you've got a few operational things to clear up before you go
yeah. You
chow
got
down
that.
and watch
Yeah,
football like the rest of it. But yeah, man, thanks again. Again, if you haven't, I'll give Mark one more plug. Mark Funk, check him out on LinkedIn. You'll see the background. So it's, some people will tout to, industry experts and gurus and ninjas. I tend to look at people's history and what they've done and accomplished. And Mark is, to say impressive is an understatement. And just the sheer amount of knowledge and experience from various vantage points, as I said earlier, it does go to tell a narrative. And again, I think he's a great resource for anybody to talk about really anything, including obviously the agent model. So, again, thanks for everybody for tuning in to this episode of Semi Related, and we'll see you again. I think we'll try to get a couple more in before the the last part of the year. And yeah, thanks again, and wishing everybody a safe and relaxing Thanksgiving holiday. So, Mark, safe travels if you have me on the road, and for
thanks, Chris.
everybody else, stay safe out there.